So I'm glad to be presenting today. Good afternoon at the LIR Annual Seminar 2026 in support of emerging literacies in libraries. Just to recap, I am a teaching and learning librarian at RCSI and everything that entails. Lots of outreach, collaboration, facilitating library skills workshops, which could be one-to-one sessions, um, some platform-specific help, specific databases or tools in relation to stats or screening papers like Covenants, for example. Prior to being a librarian, I was in adult education for many years. So uh, the current role that I have at RCSI is kind of a mix between those two, librarian teacher or teacher librarian, depending on the day. I'd like to share experience I've had on exploring the impact of Gen AI on the contemporary learner journey. Um, So this is based on recent work that I've undertaken to support a group of postgraduate learners in particular and teaching staff at RCSI. I will say that the origins of this came from completing a digital badge in generative AI for teaching and learning. Maybe some of you have heard of this course. If not, you'll have access anyway after the session. It's a really good upskill opportunity if you happen to have teaching responsibility based on the output of a digital badge course. I was tasked with creating a lesson plan or a teaching and learning opportunity that had Gen AI embedded in it. So I chose to develop a training session based on the phrase to bot or not to bot, which I would love to say that I coined that phrase. I did not. If you do a quick Google of it, it encompasses a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of really looking at intentional use of Gen AI and not only effective use, which is what librarians have been talking about since Gen AI burst onto the scene in 2023, but asking ourselves about non-use. Should we be using it at all? I think Andrew at the top of his session talked about the merits of discussing use and non-use. It allowed space for learners to reflect on what skills they really need to practice when using Gen AI. So again, moving away from that focus, not just on effective prompting, for example, but really thinking about digging deep in terms of asking questions about the content, but also really assessing the impact that it could have on their independent learning skills. This was geared specifically at healthcare graduates, obviously because I work at RCSI, who will be, of course, operating in a digital health environment in the future where Gen AI tools are embedded in the workplace. I would have loved to have called the workshop to bot or not to bot, but I was told that it wasn't academic enough. So I called it Gen AI, the learner journey and effective collaboration. So look, the feedback was really good, really positive from lecturers and students alike. And it's informed my practice as a whole as a result, because now I'm able to kind of broaden the suite of workshops that I offer postgraduate learners in relation to really let's talk about the aim. The aim was to empower learners about intentional use rather than automatic use. So rather than effectively using a tool that might encourage them to use it without thinking, I really wanted to talk about intentional use and offer them pause or opportunity to pause to reflect on how using a tool such as Gen AI affects their development as researchers, professionals, and future healthcare practitioners. So if I can talk a little bit more about the content, really was looking at Gen AI in terms of being a disruptor. I know some of you probably heard of cognitive offloading. I know Andrew spoke about that this morning. Not create this image. There is a reference list at the end of my slides as well, but this is an image that I use to talk about cognitive offloading to a group of nursing and midwifery postgrad students, because we all engage in cognitive offloading. Your brain can only process so much information. This is aligned to cognitive offloading for healthcare practitioners. So you can see that they've decided to consciously choose to offload some tasks to task delegation to colleagues, or to simply ask for help, or to use checklists and guidelines. So this is something that we do on a daily basis, no matter your environment. But I really wanted to talk about beneficial versus detrimental cognitive offloading and how an automatic use or an over-reliance on any kind of tool, including Gen AI, can weaken your independent learning and possibly lead to detrimental offloading. I will say there was plenty of scope to talk about what I call the traditional concerns in relation to Gen AI. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this. Most of you are probably very familiar with this. They lack logic reasoning. LLMs lack any logic reasoning. They mimic intelligence. They're prone to invent things. There's bias concerns, and also how do they arrive at their conclusions? Nobody really knows. I appreciate this is a little bit tongue in cheek, and Pope Francis has since passed, so no disrespect. But I'm using this as an example of deepfakes. So when this deepfake first burst onto the scene, everyone was asking, is this real? It looks kind of real. I'm not sure. Bearing in mind that this was a couple of years ago, so actually the realism in relation to image deepfakes has increased to the point where now we're having deepfake videos where people are falling for them. As one researcher has said, deepfakes are no longer a glitch in the reality, they're the new reality. So we, perhaps this crowd, this audience, we're trying to ask more questions and be a little bit more suspicious than the average person. But my mother actually thinks that cats can now do a tap dance with a cane. And that's how far we've fallen into the matrix. However, from the ridiculous to the more serious, an example of misinformation or disinformation and how easy it is now to create this example, bearing in mind that this is done for good reasons. A team of researchers in Australia created a lot of convincing AI vaccine and vaping disinformation using Gen AI, which proliferated in a manner of virus. So, just really seeing what the dangers and the risks are, putting them out there to learners. But back to the main points, beneficial offloading. Loads of examples of beneficial offloading, but if we're going to talk about Gen AI, the most basic, checking grammar and using it for brainstorming, etc. Now, why do I have a picture of a robotic Hoover? I borrowed this example from a colleague of mine who said that we were talking about cognitive offloading and beneficial cognitive offloading. She said, I have done enough hoovering in my life that I bought myself an automatic Hoover because I can free up my brain and my time for more. That's actually what cognitive offloading is. We want to avoid detrimental offloading. An example of this that I posited to students was getting AI to summarize the entire text for you or to do the reading for you. You're skipping those fundamental steps to set you up for deeper learning. And I actually think Andrew said that this morning with his example of Adobe. It's now saying, well, hey, I'll summarize the paper for you. Isn't that great? The ultimate goal for me, and actually for most HEIs, if not all, is to train graduates to be workplace ready. So for healthcare graduates at RCSI, whether it be nursing, physiotherapy, you name it, it's really avoiding detrimental offloading and recognizing that to offset that, you really need to acknowledge the essential human factor in digital health. So whether that be considering patient care, or the role of the medic, the practitioner. So to imbue them with confidence in their role as practitioner and being able to ask questions, good questions about tools in a digital health environment. So I suppose to be cognitively fit and to retain your cognitive powers. In speaking specifically about the learner journey disrupted, the workshop posited 3 real life examples, as I like to call them. They were scaffolded in terms of complexity. So this would have been one of the more simpler ones, but really, a realistic and practical example of the sorts of situations that a healthcare student might grapple when being exposed to an environment with Gen AI. So Emma's a second-year nursing student. She's under pressure. She needs to create a patient care plan. She gives instructions to Gen AI. She says, this looks great, and copies it into her assignment and says, I'm going to submit this. But that's not the end of the story. Emma struggles to explain the choices or explain any of the content in the patient care plan. And she realizes she didn't critically evaluate the AI suggestions or even check them against clinical guidelines that she would have been chose to refer to, and clinical guidelines which she would access through a point of care tool if she were a healthcare practitioner or if she was using one of our databases at RCSI, which is Health Sciences Aligned. And something else snuck in there, which is an intervention that is no longer considered valid or something that she was told to specifically avoid. So the students in the postgraduate course get to see this example and get to see the impact of the way that she chose to use Gen AI. Rounding off with some discussion questions. So asking them about what Emma actually did, what were the issues, what she could have done better, and also asking them to come up with an approach for Emma or themselves, which would protect their critical thinking, essentially. And also, importantly, I wanted them to see the risks translated from doing from problematic use of Gen AI in an education scenario, seeing how that could impact patients in the real world, because we're training healthcare graduates to be healthcare practitioners. So I'd like to say the key takeaways were essentially how to harness AI to help us at work and at study, but also really to think about how it can disrupt the development of independent learning. And obviously, to think about strategic cognitive offloading when it comes to Gen AI. A real trust in their own abilities to learn, but their own abilities to ask valid questions. And I'll finish up with saying that we're now talking about the human in the loop model, which some of you might have heard of. It's not just applied to education or healthcare. It's with any AI system that there is human oversight or human involvement, because ultimately, the human can make judgments that the machine cannot. And that informs human decision-making, critical engagement, and reflective practice. Just in the nick of time. Thank you. And there is a reference